You reach the end of the day, but your mind did not. Your body is tired, yet something inside you refuses to rest. The silence of the night is not peaceful. It is loud with thoughts you tried to ignore, fears you buried, and questions that still have no answers. You keep replaying moments, imagining outcomes, carrying weights no one else can see. And the hardest part is this: you tried to be strong all day, but now, in the dark, everything feels heavier. It feels like if you let go, everything might fall apart. But what if holding on is what's breaking you? There is a kind of weight that only shows up when everything slows down. During the day, distractions protect you. Noise keeps you moving. Responsibilities give you something to focus on. You answer messages, solve problems, make decisions, and convince yourself that you are handling everything. But night does something different. Night removes the noise. It strips away the distractions, and suddenly, what you avoided all day is right in front of you. You try to rest, but your mind refuses to cooperate. It starts revisiting conversations, analyzing details that seemed small before, but now feel significant. You think about what you said, what you should have said, what you wish you could take back. Then it shifts. It moves to tomorrow. It starts asking questions you cannot answer. What if things don't work out? What if something goes wrong? What if you are not ready for what is coming? Your breathing changes without you noticing. Your body tightens. There is a pressure in your chest that you cannot fully explain, but you feel it. It is subtle at first, then it grows. And the more you try to calm down, the more aware you become of everything that is not at peace inside you. This is not just stress. This is accumulation. Every unresolved thought, every unspoken fear, every moment you pushed through without processing is now asking for your attention all at once. And because there is no distraction left, it feels overwhelming. You tell yourself to relax, but your mind keeps searching for something else to fix. It scans for problems like it is trying to protect you, but instead it traps you. It keeps you alert, tense, unable to let go. Even your body feels like it is waiting for something, as if rest is not safe, as if you must stay in control. And then comes the quiet question you do not say out loud. Why does it feel like this now? Why does everything feel heavier at night? It feels heavier because this is the moment when you are no longer performing for anyone. This is where the truth surfaces. Not the version of you that handles everything, but the version that is tired of holding it all together. The version that needs relief, but does not know how to access it. And this is where the feeling of isolation begins to grow. Not because you are abandoned, but because no one else can see this exact moment. No one hears these thoughts the way you do. No one feels this weight the way it sits inside your chest right now. It becomes personal, internal, almost impossible to explain. But there is something deeper happening here that you might not have realized. This weight you feel is not just pressure, it is exposure. It is revealing what has been building quietly inside you for longer than today. The fears that were ignored, the doubts that were pushed aside, the exhaustion that was never acknowledged. The night is not creating these things. It is uncovering them. And if they are being uncovered, it means something is asking to be addressed. Because if you carry this same weight into tomorrow, without confronting it, it will not disappear. It will grow. It will follow you into your decisions, your reactions, your thoughts. It will shape how you see things, how you respond to people, how you interpret what happens next. This is why this moment matters more than you think. Not because it is uncomfortable, but because it is revealing the place where something needs to change. Right now, it feels like you are trapped inside your own mind, like there is no pause button, no escape from the thoughts, no way to fully shut it down. But what if this moment is not meant to trap you? What if it is meant to show you something you have been avoiding? Because what is happening inside you right now did not begin tonight. What is exhausting you is not just what happened today. It is everything you carried through it without giving yourself permission to feel. The thoughts you pushed aside so you could keep functioning. The emotions you controlled so no one would notice. The weight you adjusted to so well that even you started pretending it was normal. You moved through the day responding to what was expected of you. You showed up, you handled things, you kept your voice steady, your actions consistent. From the outside, nothing seemed out of place. But inside, something was slowly draining you. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in a quiet, constant way that you could not fully stop. There are battles that do not leave visible scars, yet they demand more strength than anything people can see. The pressure to keep everything together when you feel like you are slipping. The effort to silence thoughts that keep returning, no matter how many times you try to ignore them. The tension of carrying questions that have no immediate answers. And the hardest part is that no one pauses to ask about these battles. Because you have learned how to hide them so well. You have trained yourself to function while carrying weight, to respond while feeling overwhelmed, to keep moving even when something inside you is asking for rest. But the mind does not forget what the heart suppresses. When night comes, everything you managed during the day begins to surface. The thoughts you delayed now demand attention. The emotions you controlled now begin to rise. The questions you avoided now become louder, more persistent, more difficult to ignore. You start to feel the internal conflict more clearly. A part of you wants peace, but another part keeps searching for problems. You want to trust, but doubt keeps introducing possibilities that create fear. You remind yourself that everything will be okay, but something inside you resists that conclusion. This is where the tension deepens, not just between fear and calm, but between what you believe and what you feel. You believe that God is present. You believe that He sees you, that He cares, that He is in control. But what you feel does not always align with that belief. What you feel is uncertainty, distance, silence. And when those two realities collide, something unsettling begins to form. You begin to question without saying it directly. If God is here, why does it feel like this? If He is listening, why does the silence continue? If He is in control, why does everything still feel unstable? These questions do not always come as clear sentences. Sometimes they appear as feelings, a subtle sense of distance, a quiet doubt that settles in the background, a hesitation in your trust that was not there before. And this is where many people begin to drift without realizing it, not because they stop believing, but because they start interpreting silence as absence. They assume that because they do not feel immediate relief, nothing is happening. That because the answer has not arrived, God is not moving. But that interpretation is shaped by the struggle, not by truth. Silence does not mean inactivity. Delay does not mean neglect. And what you cannot feel right now is not an accurate measure of what is actually happening, because there is a reality beyond your current perception, a reality that does not depend on your emotions, your thoughts, or your ability to understand what is unfolding. The problem is not that God is distant. The problem is that the battle you are facing is internal, and internal battles distort perception. They make you question what you know, They make you feel disconnected even when you are not. They make you interpret silence as abandonment when it is not. And if that distortion is not confronted, it will continue shaping how you see everything. Because the most dangerous part of these silent battles is not the weight itself. It is the conclusions they try to convince you to accept. And one of those conclusions is about to be challenged. There comes a moment in the middle of all this weight where the silence begins to feel personal, not just quiet, but intentional, as if something that should be happening is not, as if a response you expected never arrived. You prayed, you tried to trust, you held on as long as you could, and yet the situation did not shift the way you hoped. That is when the thought starts forming, slowly but persistently. Maybe God is not responding. You do not say it out loud, but you feel it. You measure the silence by your expectations. You look at what has not changed and use that as evidence. The problem is not only the situation anymore, it becomes the interpretation of the silence. Because when nothing seems to move, the mind tries to fill the gap. It creates explanations to reduce uncertainty. It tells you that if you cannot see movement, there must not be any. If you cannot feel something, it must not be there. And without realizing it, you begin to associate God's presence with immediate results. But that connection is flawed. God's presence is not proven by how quickly things change. It is revealed in ways that do not always match your timing, your expectations, or your understanding of what should happen next. And this is where the internal struggle intensifies. You are not only dealing with fear or uncertainty, you are dealing with the tension between your need for confirmation and God's way of working beyond what you can immediately perceive. The silence you feel is not empty. It is active in ways that are not obvious. There are things being aligned, protected, prevented, and prepared that you cannot measure right now. But because you cannot measure them, your mind begins to question them. You start to wonder if you missed something, if you did something wrong, if your faith was not enough, if your prayers were not heard the way you thought they would be. And that is where the weight becomes heavier, because now it is not just external pressure, it becomes internal doubt. But the truth does not change based on how it feels in this moment. God does not withdraw because you feel overwhelmed. He does not step back because you are struggling to understand. He does not become absent simply because the answer has not arrived yet. His presence is not conditional on your clarity. It is constant, even when your perception is unstable. What you are facing right now is not abandonment. It is a moment where your dependence is being redirected. You are being taken from needing visible confirmation to learning how to trust without it. And that shift is uncomfortable because control feels safer than surrender. Understanding feels safer than uncertainty. Immediate answers feel safer than waiting. But the deeper reality is this: what you are asking for right now might not be what you actually need most. There are things God does in silence that could not happen in noise. There are changes happening inside you that require stillness, even if that stillness feels like delay. There are protections in place that you will only recognize later, when you can finally see what did not happen, because He was already working. Right now, you are standing in a space between what you expected and what is actually unfolding. And that space creates tension. It challenges your trust. It forces you to confront what your faith is really anchored in. Because if your trust depends on immediate answers, it will always feel unstable. But if your trust is anchored in who God is, not in what you can currently see, then even silence begins to change meaning. Silence is no longer absence. It becomes a place where something deeper is happening. And if that is true, then the question is no longer why God is quiet. The real question is what happens when you stop trying to control what only He can carry. At some point, the exhaustion you feel is no longer just from what you're facing. It comes from how tightly you have been holding everything together. The constant need to anticipate outcomes, to prepare for every possibility, to mentally rehearse what could go wrong so you can avoid it. You call it responsibility, but deep down, it has become something else. It has become control. And control feels necessary when uncertainty grows. It gives you the illusion that if you think enough, plan enough, worry enough, you can prevent pain. So you keep analyzing, adjusting, trying to stay one step ahead of everything. But instead of creating peace, it creates pressure. Because no matter how much you try, there are things you cannot predict, situations you cannot fix, outcomes you cannot guarantee. That is where the tension begins to break you. You start realizing that no amount of effort is giving you the rest you need. Your mind stays active, even when your body is ready to stop. Your thoughts keep searching for solutions that do not exist yet. And the more you try to hold everything together, the more it feels like it is slipping through your hands. There is a moment, quiet but undeniable, where you begin to see the truth. You were never meant to carry all of this, not because you are weak, but because some things were never assigned to you in the first place. The need to control outcomes, the pressure to resolve everything immediately, the responsibility of knowing how everything will unfold. These are weights that go beyond your capacity, and the longer you carry them, the heavier they become. But letting go does not feel natural. It feels risky. It feels like giving up. It feels like something important might be lost if you release your grip. That is why you resist it. That is why even now, part of you is still holding on, still trying to manage what cannot be managed, because control creates a false sense of safety. It convinces you that as long as you are involved, things will not fall apart. But the reality you are starting to face is different. The more you try to control, the more anxious you become. The more you try to fix everything, the less peace you experience. And that leads you to a breaking point. Not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet realization. A moment where you recognize that continuing like this is not sustainable. That something inside you is asking for release, not more effort. That what you need is not another solution, but a shift. This is the moment where surrender begins to appear as an option, not as weakness, but as alignment. Not as loss, but as relief. Not as abandoning responsibility, but as returning what was never yours to carry. And yet, even standing at this point, there is hesitation. Because surrender requires trust. It requires you to place what you cannot control into hands you cannot see. It requires you to accept that peace will not come from managing everything, but from releasing what you were never meant to hold. That is where the real decision begins. Not whether you can keep going like this, but whether you are willing to stop. Because the weight you feel right now is not only asking to be understood, it is asking to be released. And that release does not begin with a solution. It begins with something much simpler and much harder at the same time. It begins with letting go, one breath at a time. Right now, without realizing it, you're holding more than thoughts. You're holding tension in your body, pressure in your chest, a tightness in your breathing that has been building quietly throughout the day. You adapted to it. You kept moving with it. But now that everything has slowed down, your body is no longer distracted. It is signaling that something needs to be released. You try to rest, but your breathing remains shallow, quick, controlled. almost guarded, as if even your breath is trying to stay alert. This is what constant pressure does. It trains your body to remain in a state of readiness, even when there is no immediate danger. And the longer you stay in that state, the harder it becomes to relax. But there is something powerful about what you are doing right now. You are noticing it, and noticing is the first shift, because the weight you are carrying is not only mental, it has settled into your body. It has shaped your breathing, your posture, your internal rhythm, and if it entered through repetition, it can begin to leave through intention. Take a slow breath, not to force calm, but to interrupt the pattern. Let the air come in fully, deeper than you have allowed yourself all day. Hold it for a moment, just enough to feel it, then release it slowly, without rushing, without controlling how it leaves. As you exhale, something subtle begins to happen. Not everything disappears, but something loosens. The grip softens, the urgency decreases, the tension begins to lose its intensity. Do it again, not as a technique, but as a decision to stop holding everything at once. Because every breath you take right now is an opportunity to release something you carried without noticing. The conversation that stayed in your mind, the fear that kept returning, the pressure you placed on yourself to handle everything perfectly. It does not all leave at once, but it does not need to. What matters is that you are no longer holding it the same way. There is a connection between what you breathe in and what you hold inside. And for a long time today, you have been holding more than you were meant to. Thoughts, expectations, responsibilities that exceeded your limits. And now, in this moment, you are being given the chance to begin releasing them, not through force, but through awareness. You do not have to solve everything tonight. You do not have to understand everything tonight, but you can begin to let go of the way you have been carrying it, because holding on has not given you peace. It has only increased the weight. And as you continue breathing, something else becomes clear. There are specific things attached to this weight, not just general stress, but defined worries, real concerns, particular thoughts that keep returning. They have names, and until you recognize them, they will continue to feel like one overwhelming pressure. But once you begin to identify them, something shifts, because what is named can be released with intention, and what you are about to face next requires exactly that. Up to this point, everything has felt like one single weight, a pressure that is hard to define, difficult to separate, almost impossible to explain. But the truth is, what you are carrying is not one thing. It is many things, layered together, unprocessed, unnamed, and therefore overwhelming. And what remains unnamed gains power, because when you do not define what is disturbing your peace, your mind treats it as something larger than it actually is. It becomes a constant presence, a background tension that never fully leaves. You feel it, but you cannot confront it. You carry it, but you cannot release it. So now, instead of avoiding it, you face it. Not everything at once, but one thing at a time. What is the thought that keeps returning no matter how much you try to move past it? What is the concern that quietly follows you throughout the day and becomes louder at night? What is the situation you keep replaying, trying to fix in your mind, even though you know you cannot change it right now? This is where honesty becomes necessary. Not the kind of honesty you show others, but the kind you allow yourself when no one else is listening. The kind that does not minimize, does not pretend, does not push things aside just to maintain control. Because what you are about to do requires clarity, You begin to name it. Maybe it is fear about something that has not happened yet, but feels close enough to affect you now. Maybe it is regret over something that cannot be undone. Maybe it is uncertainty about a decision that still has no clear direction. Maybe it is exhaustion from carrying responsibilities that never seem to decrease. Whatever it is, you stop generalizing it. You stop calling it just stress or just anxiety. You bring it into focus, and as you do that, something shifts. It no longer feels like an undefined weight. It becomes specific. It becomes something you can look at, something you can recognize, something you can separate from everything else. This is where the process begins to change, because once something is identified, it can be addressed differently. It no longer controls everything from the background. It is no longer everywhere at once. It is placed in front of you, where it can be seen clearly. And here is where the tension rises again. Because now that you see it, you realize something else. You have been holding onto it longer than you needed to. Not because you wanted to, but because you did not know how to release it. You tried to manage it, to think your way through it, to carry it until it resolved on its own. But it did not, and now you are faced with a decision. You can continue holding it, analyzing it, revisiting it, allowing it to shape your peace, or you can begin to do something different, something that does not depend on your ability to fix it. Because the next step is not about understanding it more. It is about allowing something greater than you to enter into it. And that requires more than awareness. It requires openness. There is something you have not fully released yet, not because you do not believe in God, but because part of you still feels responsible for managing it on your own. You have prayed about it, but only to a certain point. You have mentioned it, but you have not truly let it go. You have kept a portion of it under your control, just in case. This is where many people remain stuck without realizing it. They invite God into their lives, but not into everything. They trust Him with what feels safe, but hold back what feels too important, too uncertain, too personal, not out of defiance, but out of fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of what might happen if they stop managing it themselves. So you carry it in silence, even while asking for peace. You bring it to your mind again and again, trying to resolve it, trying to anticipate outcomes, trying to protect yourself from what could go wrong. And while you are doing that, something deeper is happening. You are reinforcing the belief that it depends on you, but it does not. The situation you keep revisiting, the one you keep analyzing, the one that refuses to leave your thoughts, is not waiting for more of your effort. It is waiting for your release. And release does not happen partially. It does not happen while you still hold on to control in the background. It happens when you stop managing it in your own strength and allow God to take full authority over it. This is the part that feels difficult, because letting God in fully means stepping back completely. It means accepting that you will not control the outcome. It means trusting without needing to monitor every detail. It means placing something deeply important into hands you cannot see and choosing not to take it back. That creates tension inside you. A part of you resists. It questions. It tries to justify why you should keep holding on just a little longer. It tells you that if you release it, you might lose something. That if you stop thinking about it, something might go wrong. But that voice is not leading you to peace. It is keeping you in pressure, because what you have been doing has not brought you rest. It has only kept you engaged in a cycle that does not end. And now you are being invited into something different, not into passivity, but into trust, not into neglect, but into alignment, not into giving up, but into handing over what was never yours to carry alone. You do not need to have everything resolved before you release it. You do not need to understand how it will unfold. You do not need guarantees before you let go. What you need is the willingness to stop holding it, to take that situation clearly defined, fully acknowledged, and place it in God's hands without conditions, without deadlines, without trying to stay in control from a distance, because as long as you are holding on to it, even partially, it will continue to hold on to you. And once you release it, something shifts immediately, not necessarily in the situation, but in you. The pressure begins to change. The urgency begins to decrease. The constant need to revisit it begins to fade. But releasing control leads to another challenge, because once you let go, you are left without answers. And that is where the next struggle begins. Now that you have released what you were holding, something unexpected happens. The weight shifts, but the answers do not arrive. The situation remains unresolved. The outcome is still unknown. And in that space, a new tension begins to form. Because you were not only holding the situation, you were also holding the need to understand it. You wanted clarity. You wanted confirmation. You wanted something concrete that would tell you everything is going to be fine. And now, without that, your mind tries to go back. It searches for something to hold on to again. It looks for explanations, timelines, signs that things are moving in the direction you expect, but nothing immediate appears. And this is where trust is tested in its purest form. Not when everything makes sense, but when nothing is clear. Not when the path is visible, but when it disappears in front of you. Not when you feel secure, but when you have no evidence yet that things are changing. Because if trust depends on answers, it is not really trust. It is agreement with what you can already see. Real trust begins when you no longer have access to certainty, and that is uncomfortable. Your mind resists this space because it cannot control it. It cannot measure progress. It cannot predict outcomes. It cannot calculate what happens next. And without those things, it feels exposed, vulnerable, unsettled. That is why the temptation to take control again becomes strong. You feel the urge to go back to thinking about it, analyzing it, trying to figure it out on your own. You want to rebuild the sense of control you just released, because at least control feels like action, even if it never brought you peace. But this is the moment where something deeper is being formed. You are learning to stand in uncertainty without collapsing into fear. You are learning to exist without immediate answers and still remain steady. You are learning that peace does not come from knowing everything, but from trusting the one who does. And this is not passive. This is active trust. It is the decision to stop demanding clarity before allowing yourself to rest. It is choosing to believe that even without visible movement, something is already being handled. It is refusing to let the absence of answers pull you back into anxiety, because what you are facing right now is not a lack of response. It is a process that is not visible yet. God does not operate within the limits of your timing. He is not restricted by your need to understand. He is working in layers you cannot access, in ways that do not depend on your awareness to be real. And while you are waiting for answers, He is already positioning outcomes. But you will not see that if you keep trying to replace trust with control. So you remain here, not with everything resolved, but with something stronger beginning to form inside you. A quiet stability, a decision that does not depend on circumstances, a trust that does not need constant reassurance. And in this space, something begins to settle, because you are no longer trying to force peace. You are allowing it to enter. And that is where the next step begins. Now that you have stopped trying to control and accepted that answers may not come immediately, you are standing in a different kind of silence. Not the silence that creates fear, but the silence that invites surrender. This is where words begin to matter differently, not as repetition, not as routine, but as a direct expression of what you are ready to release. You are no longer praying to convince God to act. You are praying to align yourself with what He is already doing. So you slow down. You do not rush through this moment. You do not try to say everything perfectly. You speak with intention, with honesty, without hiding anything that still feels heavy inside you. God, I am no longer holding this on my own. The words are simple, but the decision behind them is not. Because as you say this, you are choosing to step out of control completely. You are choosing to stop managing what has been consuming your thoughts. You are choosing to trust without conditions. I release what I cannot fix. There is something specific behind that sentence. Something you named, something you carried, something you tried to resolve in your own strength. And now, instead of revisiting it, you are placing it outside of your control. I let go of the outcome. This is where surrender becomes real. Not just releasing the situation, but releasing how it should end. Releasing your expectations, your timelines, your imagined conclusions. Accepting that what happens next is not yours to determine. I trust you, even without understanding. These words confront the part of you that still wants clarity, the part that feels uncomfortable not knowing. And instead of feeding that need, you redirect it. You choose trust over explanation. You choose peace over certainty. As you continue, something inside you begins to respond. The urgency decreases. The need to think about it again weakens. The constant pressure that was driving your thoughts begins to lose its intensity. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer holding it the same way. This is what surrender does. It does not change everything around you instantly. It changes what is happening inside you immediately. And that internal shift is what creates space for something new. Because where there was tension, there is now room for calm. Where there was pressure, there is now openness. Where there was control, there is now trust. And in that space, something begins to rise. Not noise, not urgency, but authority. Because once you have released what was weighing you down, you are no longer speaking from fear. You are speaking from a different position. And that is where the next step begins. Now that you are no longer holding everything inside, something shifts in your position. You are not speaking from pressure anymore. You are not reacting to fear. You are no longer trying to manage what was overwhelming you. You are standing in a place where what you say begins to carry direction, not confusion. Because your mind, left unattended, will always return to what it knows. It will try to revisit the same thoughts, rebuild the same fears, reconstruct the same scenarios. It will attempt to pull you back into the cycle you just stepped out of, not because it wants to harm you, but because it is conditioned to protect you through control. But now, you interrupt that pattern. You do not wait for your thoughts to change on their own. You do not allow fear to quietly return and settle again. You take a position. You begin to speak with intention over what is happening inside you. Peace is not something you wait to feel. It is something you establish. Right now, you make a decision about your mind, not based on what it is doing, but based on what it should no longer continue doing. Every anxious thought that tries to return, you do not follow it. Every fear that tries to rebuild itself, you do not entertain it. every scenario that tries to pull you back into uncertainty. You do not give it authority because you are no longer in agreement with what disturbs your peace. And this is where something becomes clear. Your thoughts are not all aligned with truth. Some of them are shaped by fear. Some of them are influenced by past experiences. Some of them are simply reactions to uncertainty. And if you do not confront them, they will continue speaking as if they have authority, but they do not. You begin to declare something different. My mind will not be controlled by fear. You are not denying that fear exists. You are refusing to let it lead. You are separating what you feel from what you choose to accept. My thoughts will not run without direction. You are no longer allowing your mind to move unchecked. You are setting a boundary. You are deciding what remains and what does not. I choose peace, even when my thoughts try to resist it. This is not passive. This is intentional, because peace is not always automatic. Sometimes it is established through decision before it is fully felt. And as you continue, something begins to stabilize. The intensity of your thoughts starts to decrease, not because they disappeared instantly, but because they are no longer being reinforced. You are no longer feeding them with attention, with analysis, with emotional reaction. You are redirecting them. And in that redirection, something stronger begins to take place. Because once your mind is no longer dominated by fear, it becomes available for something else. Clarity begins to replace confusion. Stillness begins to replace urgency. And a sense of control that does not come from effort, but from alignment, begins to take shape. You are no longer reacting to everything that enters your mind. You are deciding what stays. And in that decision, you begin to experience something you have not felt in a while. Space. But peace over your mind is not the only thing that needs to be established, because there is still a part of you that seeks security beyond your thoughts, something deeper, something that reaches beyond what you can control internally. And that is where the next step begins. Now that your mind is no longer leading you into fear, a deeper need begins to surface. It is not just about thoughts anymore. It is about safety, a quiet desire to know that as you close your eyes, nothing will disturb your rest. Nothing will invade your peace. Nothing will break what is finally beginning to settle inside you. Because even when your thoughts calm down, there is still a question that lingers beneath everything. What if something goes wrong while I am not in control? That question reveals something important. You have been relying on your awareness to feel safe, as if staying alert, staying mentally active, staying in control was protecting you. But now that you are letting go, that sense of control is fading. And without it, you feel exposed. This is where protection becomes necessary. Not the kind you create, not the kind you manage, but the kind that comes from beyond you. You are no longer trying to guard everything on your own. You are no longer depending on your ability to anticipate and prevent. You are stepping into a different kind of security, one that does not require your constant attention. God, I invite your protection over this night. These words are not routine. They are a shift in responsibility. You are no longer positioning yourself as the one who must remain in control. You are placing yourself under a covering that does not depend on your awareness. Watch over my mind as I rest, because even in sleep, your mind can wander. It can return to old patterns, revisit fears, recreate tension. But now, you are not leaving it unguarded. You are placing it under something greater than your own control. Guard my heart from everything that tries to disturb my peace. You are not only asking for protection from external things, but from internal disruptions, from the thoughts, emotions, and memories that try to rise when everything becomes quiet. Let nothing have authority over me tonight, except your presence. This is where security becomes clear, not in your ability to manage everything, but in recognizing that there is a presence greater than anything that could disturb you. And as you continue, something begins to settle deeper. The need to stay alert begins to fade. The sense of vulnerability starts to disappear. The pressure to remain in control is no longer necessary because you are no longer unprotected. You are no longer responsible for guarding every detail, every possibility, every unknown. You have placed yourself under something constant, something that does not sleep, something that does not lose awareness. And in that realization, your body begins to respond. The tension decreases, your breathing slows naturally. The internal resistance that kept you from fully relaxing starts to dissolve. You are no longer preparing for something to go wrong. You are allowing yourself to rest. But even with this sense of protection, there is still one more layer that needs to be released, because part of your mind is still reaching forward, still trying to touch tomorrow before it arrives. And that is where the next shift must happen. Even now, with your mind calmer and your heart more at ease, there is still a part of you that refuses to stay in this moment. It reaches forward, trying to step into tomorrow before it exists. It begins to imagine what could happen, what might go wrong, what needs to be prepared. It pulls you out of rest and places you back into anticipation. This is where anxiety quietly rebuilds itself, not through what is happening now, but through what has not happened yet. You start thinking about responsibilities waiting for you, conversations that need to happen, decisions that still have no clear direction, situations that feel unresolved. And without noticing, you begin to carry tomorrow as if it already belongs to you. But it does not. Tomorrow has not been given to you yet, and yet you are already trying to manage it. This is the pattern that keeps you from resting, not the weight of today, but the attempt to control what comes next. You move ahead mentally, trying to solve problems that are not fully formed, trying to prepare for outcomes that have not taken shape, and in doing that, you bring tomorrow's uncertainty into tonight's peace. That is why rest feels interrupted, because part of you is no longer here. So now you stop, not by force, but by decision. You recognize what your mind is doing, and instead of following it, you interrupt it. Tomorrow is not mine to carry tonight. These words draw a clear boundary. You are not denying that tomorrow matters. You are refusing to carry it prematurely. I release what has not happened. You are letting go of imagined scenarios, of projected fears, of possibilities that have no reality yet. You are removing their influence over this moment. I trust that when tomorrow comes, I will not face it alone. This is where trust extends forward without anxiety. You are not trying to control what is coming. You are choosing to believe that when it arrives, you will be given what you need to face it. And as you do this, something begins to return. Your attention shifts back to the present. The urgency fades. The need to anticipate disappears. The mental movement that was pulling you forward comes to a stop. You are no longer living ahead of yourself. You are here. And being here changes everything, because peace does not exist in tomorrow. It exists in this moment. And the more you return to it, the more stable you become. You do not need to solve tomorrow to rest tonight. You do not need to understand what is coming to experience peace now. You only need to stop carrying what has not been given to you. And as you release that final layer, something deeper begins to settle. Not just calm, but assurance. A quiet certainty that even what you cannot see is already being handled. And that realization leads you into something stronger than relief. It leads you into trust that does not depend on timing. Now that you are no longer holding the past, no longer trying to control the present, and no longer carrying the future, something unfamiliar begins to emerge. It is not just calm, it is a quiet assurance that does not depend on what you can see. Because the truth is, while you were trying to understand everything, something was already happening beyond your awareness. God was never waiting for you to figure it out. He was never paused, never inactive, never uncertain. The moment you began to feel overwhelmed, He was already working, not in a way that demanded your understanding, but in a way that secured what you could not manage on your own. And this is where your perspective begins to change. You are no longer looking at your situation as something unresolved. You are beginning to see it as something in progress, not abandoned, not forgotten, not delayed without purpose, but actively being handled in ways you cannot measure yet. Because there are movements you cannot see, there are things being prevented that you will never have to face. There are paths being redirected that will only make sense later. There are outcomes being shaped right now, even in silence, even without visible signs. And the only reason it felt like nothing was happening is because you were trying to measure it with your own perception. But what God does is not limited to what you can detect. Right now, something is being aligned. Even if your situation looks the same, it is not the same, because what is happening behind it has already begun to shift. The details you cannot see, the timing you cannot control, the connections you are unaware of, all of it is moving under His authority. And this is where trust deepens, not because you finally received answers, but because you no longer need them to believe that something is happening. You begin to rest differently, not waiting for change, but trusting that change is already in motion, not demanding confirmation, but accepting that what God is doing does not require your constant awareness to be real. And as that settles inside you, something else begins to release. The urgency is gone. The pressure to monitor everything disappears. The need to check, to think again, to revisit the situation loses its strength, because you are no longer trying to stay involved in what has already been handed over. You are stepping back, not in fear, but in confidence. Confidence that what you cannot see is still being taken care of. Confidence that your situation is not dependent on your ability to manage it. Confidence that even in silence, nothing is standing still. And this confidence begins to create something deeper than relief. It creates rest, not forced, not temporary, but rooted in something stable. A rest that does not fluctuate with your thoughts, a rest that does not disappear when uncertainty appears, a rest that comes from knowing that you are not alone in what you are facing. And as this realization settles, your entire state begins to slow down, not because everything is resolved, but because you no longer need it to be resolved right now. You are no longer resisting the moment, you are allowing it. And that is where something even deeper begins to happen, because once your mind accepts that God is already working, your soul begins to respond in a way it has been waiting to. It begins to be still. Now that you are no longer resisting what you cannot control, something deeper begins to settle within you, not just in your thoughts, but in your entire being. The urgency that once defined this moment is gone. The need to act, to think, to solve, to anticipate begins to fade into the background. And in its place, stillness begins to rise, not forced, not artificial, but natural. like something that was always meant to happen, but was delayed by everything you were carrying. Your soul has been waiting for this, for a moment where it no longer has to keep up with the pressure of your thoughts, for a moment where it is not pulled in different directions by fear, expectation, and uncertainty, for a moment where it can finally exist without tension. And now, that moment is here. You feel it in the way your body begins to soften, the way your breathing slows without effort, the way your mind no longer searches for something to fix. There is no resistance anymore, no internal conflict trying to take control again. Just quiet. But this quiet is different from the silence that troubled you before. That silence was filled with unanswered questions, with tension, with noise disguised as thoughts. This silence is filled with presence. It does not demand anything from you. It does not pressure you to respond. It simply holds you in a place where nothing needs to be solved right now. And in this space, something begins to restore. Your mind is no longer carrying weight. Your heart is no longer under pressure. Your body is no longer preparing for something that has not happened. Everything begins to align with what you have already chosen. Trust, release, surrender. And as this alignment deepens, you realize something that was not clear before. You do not need to do anything else. There is no final effort required, no last thought you need to resolve, no hidden problem you need to uncover before you can rest. What needed to be released has already been released. What needed to be surrendered has already been placed in God's hands. What needed to be trusted has already been entrusted. And now, your only role is to remain here, not in effort, but in stillness. Because stillness is not emptiness. It is a state where everything inside you stops resisting what is already in place. It is where your soul stops trying to move ahead, stops trying to go back, and finally stays where peace exists. Here. And as you remain here, something else begins to happen. Your awareness starts to fade gently, not into confusion, but into rest. The kind of rest that does not require your attention. The kind of rest that does not need you to stay alert. You are no longer holding anything. You are no longer waiting for anything. You are simply resting in what already is. And in this state, you are ready for what comes next. Not another effort, but a final realization that will change the way you experience this night completely. There was a moment tonight when everything felt heavy, when your thoughts would not stop, when the silence seemed filled with pressure instead of peace. You felt the weight of what you were carrying, the tension of what you could not control, the uncertainty of what had not yet been resolved. But you are not in that same place anymore. Something changed, not necessarily around you, but within you. The way you are holding everything is different now. The urgency is gone. The pressure has loosened. The need to keep thinking, to keep analyzing, to keep trying to manage everything has faded. And what remains is something quieter, but stronger. You are not alone in this moment. Not in your thoughts, not in your struggles, not in what you released, and not in what you still do not fully understand. God has been present through every part of this night. Not distant, not silent in absence, but working, holding, covering, even when you could not feel it clearly. And now, you do not need to search for that presence anymore. You are already within it. There is nothing left for you to fix, nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to anticipate. What needed to be surrendered has been surrendered. What needed to be released has been released. What needed to be trusted has been placed in hands that do not fail. So now, You rest, not because everything is solved, but because you are no longer trying to solve everything. Not because you have all the answers, but because you no longer need them to be at peace. Not because tomorrow is clear, but because you trust the one who is already there. Let your body rest without resistance. Let your mind remain still without returning to old patterns. Let your breathing stay calm without effort. There is no threat in this moment. There is no pressure on you right now. There is no responsibility you need to carry into this rest. You are safe. You are covered. You are held. And as you remain here, something final settles into place. Peace that does not depend on circumstances. Peace that does not require control. Peace that remains, even when you are no longer thinking about it. This is where you let go completely. Not gradually, not carefully, but fully. You allow yourself to drift into rest without holding anything back. Because tonight, you are not alone, and you do not need to stay awake to keep everything together. Everything that matters is already in God's hands. Now, you can rest.